Welcome to our channel, where the stories of people from different eras and professions come to life. We are in magnificent Ephesus, right by the sea, where the great temple of Artemis reaches toward the heavens, and ships from all over the world fill the harbor. Subscribe, and after listening, be sure to share your impressions in the comments.
In New York, at the end of the 19th century, two worlds existed side by side. On grand avenues, shop windows sparkled, and ladies in silk walked under parasols. In the narrow alleys of the Lower East Side, women washed laundry, and vendors sold stale bread. A boy was born in a cramped tenement, where three families shared one hallway. His father once ran a small tailoring shop, but competition and illness destroyed it. By age 8, the shop was gone. His mother took in laundry. Every morning she carried bundles to the wash house, returning with red, raw hands. The boy helped carry water and run errands. He learned that life demanded constant effort. One day, a neighbor laundress fell ill. The mother agreed to wash linens for the Grand Palace Hotel on Fifth Avenue. The boy delivered the bundle. He walked past saloons onto wider streets where people moved confidently. He clutched the heavy package, afraid to soil it. The hotel rose like a mirage with its stone facade and green awning. The doorman pointed to the service entrance. Inside, the corridor smelled of wax and flowers. From deeper came smells of roasting meat and fresh bread. Copper pots gleamed. A chef stirred a pot while a dishwasher hummed. It seemed a perfectly ordered world where everyone had a role. The boy returned home, but could not forget that hidden place. That night, on his thin mattress, he thought of the system and cleanliness. There, it seemed, a person could become someone if they worked hard and never gave up. Several weeks later, the boy returned to the Grand Palace Hotel with another bundle of clean linens. This time, Mrs. Helen Porter, the stout housekeeper with sharp eyes and a ring of keys at her waist, stopped him. "Can you read and count, lad?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the boy replied. His father had taught him before illness took its toll. Mrs. Porter looked him over. "We need a messenger boy. $2 a week, 1 meal a day, work from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. Can you manage it?" The boy nodded without hesitation. $2 was nearly what his mother earned in a week of exhausting laundry work. One less mouth to feed at home. He would manage. He had to. Thus began his life at the Grand Palace. At first, he simply ran errands, delivering notes to nearby offices, buying fresh flowers at the market, carrying shoes to the cobbler, and fetching newspapers. His feet soon knew every corner of the neighborhood and every merchant. He was quick, quiet, and unnoticeable, a quality that proved most valuable. The hotel disliked those who stood out, asked questions, or stared at guests. The head maître d'hôtel, Mr. Charles Bennett, a tall, grey-haired man with the bearing of a retired military officer, taught him this. Mr. Bennett commanded the dining room like a general. His word was law for the waiters. His sharp eyes spotted every wrinkle in a tablecloth or speck on a glass. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, the entire kitchen fell silent. "Remember, boy," Mr. Bennett said one day as the lad stood before him holding a tray of messages, "in this house, you are a shadow. Guests should not notice you, but you must see everything." The boy nodded. He truly saw much. Guests arriving in fine carriages or on foot, all demanding the same respect. He watched waiters change their expressions based on the size of tips. He saw kitchen staff hiding leftovers in their aprons for their children. He observed injustice and kindness, greed and generosity, all mixed together. Gradually, his duties expanded. He helped in the dining room, served water, cleared tables, and arranged silverware. His movements grew precise, his posture straighter. He learned to walk silently, open doors smoothly, and anticipate guests' wishes from a single gesture. It was like a dance, but he always remained behind the scenes. The boy's father passed away when he was 11. His mother did not cry. Her tears had dried up long ago when they sold the tailoring shop. The funeral was modest, at a crowded cemetery in the Lower East Side, where headstones stood so close that names barely fit on the plaques. The boy did not ask for time off, but Mrs. Porter gave him half a day. When he returned, she silently handed him a roll with sausage and nodded, "Back to work." Now he was the sole provider. His mother continued laundry work, but her strength was fading and orders were fewer. The boy gave her nearly all his earnings, keeping only a few cents for himself. Sometimes he stayed late helping the night staff and was allowed to sleep in the storeroom on sacks of flour. He never complained. Complaints changed nothing. At 12, he first saw true luxury up close. Sent to a third-floor suite to return a forgotten umbrella, he climbed the carpeted staircase. The soft pile felt like a dream under his feet. The hallway was wide, lined with gilded mirrors and chandeliers. The guest, a middle-aged man in a silk robe with a cigar, opened the door himself. "Leave it on the table," he said. The boy stepped inside and froze. The suite was larger than their entire tenement apartment. High windows, velvet drapes, dark wood furniture, a bed with a canopy, thick carpets, and heavy framed paintings. A basket of fruit sat on the table, apples, grapes, peaches, each worth more than a day's wages. The boy placed the umbrella, bowed, and left. But the image lingered. He did not envy. Envy seemed pointless. Yet he understood there was a vast gulf between his world and this one, a gulf one could cross only by a narrow bridge of hard work, patience, and luck. He decided to try. Mr. Bennet noticed his diligence. One evening, while the boy mopped the dining room floor after closing, the maître d'hôtel approached. "Do you want to stay here?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Then learn. Watch the waiters. Remember how tables are set, how dishes are served, how guests are spoken to. Mistakes are not forgiven here, but hard work is rewarded. Understood?" The boy nodded. From then on, something new kindled in his chest. Not quite hope, but a clear, achievable goal. He wanted to become part of this ordered world. Not as a guest, but as one who maintained the order, who knew all the hotel's secrets and kept them locked away. At night, falling asleep on his thin mattress, he repeated the names of dishes he heard in the dining room. Consommé, sirloin, filet mignon, profiteroles. The words sounded like spells opening a door to another life. He imagined himself in a clean shirt and pressed apron, moving between tables, invisible yet all-seeing. The city lived its own life. The Lower East Side buzzed with saloons and street vendors, while Fifth Avenue rumbled with carriages and the first automobiles. Newspapers spoke of progress and the coming new century. But for the young man, now 18, the universe had narrowed to the halls and corridors of the Grand Palace Hotel. 10 long years had passed since he first carried laundry through the service door. From messenger boy, he had risen to junior waiter. The climb had been steep, like ascending 7 flights without pause, yet he had completed it without complaint or backward glance. His mother still lived in the same cramped tenement, though now she lay in bed more often than she worked. Rheumatism had gnarled her hands into twisted branches that could barely hold a needle. He rented a tiny room for himself in a boarding house for hotel staff, a narrow bed, a chair, a washstand. The window opened onto a dark air shaft where sunlight never reached, but it was his own space, a small victory in the long battle for dignity. The junior waiter's uniform, black trousers, crisp white shirt, vest, apron reaching the knees, and shoes polished to a mirror shine, hung in the closet like a knight's armor. Each morning, he donned it with the solemn feeling of an actor stepping onto the stage. He became someone else, no longer a boy from the poor district, but part of the flawless mechanism of the Grand Palace. Mr. Charles Bennet took him seriously under his wing. The old maître d'hôtel was strict yet fair. He never forgave carelessness, but he freely shared his knowledge with anyone hungry to learn. And the young man was ravenous for it, as if knowledge itself could fill the hunger he had carried since childhood. "Look at this table," Mr. Bennet would say early in the empty dining room, gesturing at the precise setup. "What do you see? A tablecloth? Silverware? Glasses? Napkins? No, you see symmetry, harmony, respect. Every fork lies exactly 2 centimeters from the edge. Every glass stands directly above the knife. This is not accident. It is language, the language that tells the guest, here you will be cared for, here you are safe, here everything is under control." The young man nodded and memorized every detail. He learned to set tables so perfectly that a ruler could verify the alignment. He practiced carrying a heavy tray on one hand, balancing 5 full glasses without spilling a single drop. He mastered opening wine bottles in silence, so the liquid slid down the inside of the glass like silk, rather than splashing. Yet the greatest lesson was something deeper, the art of invisibility. "You are not a person in this room," Mr. Bennet taught. "You are a shadow, a breath, a suggestion. The guest must never notice you approach or depart. He should simply discover that his wish has been granted as if by magic. Movements smooth, steps silent, eyes lowered yet seeing everything." The young man understood completely. He watched the senior waiters glide between tables, appearing exactly when needed and vanishing when conversations turned private. It was a silent ballet, every step rehearsed, improvisation allowed only within strict rules. He came to love the work, not merely for the $5 a week, plus unpredictable tips that could sometimes double his earnings, but for the quiet pride of mastery. When the dining room ran like a perfect clock, when guests left satisfied, and Mr. Bennet gave an approving nod at the end of the evening, he felt something close to contentment. He came to love the work not only for the money, $5 a week plus tips that could double the amount on good days, but for the quiet pride of mastery. When the dining room ran like a perfect clock, guests left satisfied, and Mr. Bennet gave an approving nod at the end of the evening, the young man felt something close to contentment. Tips were unpredictable as spring weather. A rich industrialist might leave 10 cents after a $20 meal, while a modest teacher could give $2 after supper costing $5. He quickly learned to tell the generous from the stingy, not by their clothes, but by their glance, their manner, and how they treated the staff. Those who had known hardship themselves usually tipped more. The hotel worked like a small army. Mr. Bennet was the general, the waiters his officers, and everyone else, cooks, maids, bellmen, the soldiers. Crossing lines was forbidden. Among the maids, Mary Callahan stood out. She was about 25, with a plain but kind face, busy hands, and watchful eyes. She cleaned the third-floor rooms, changed linens, brought fresh towels, and kept everything shining. The young man often saw her in the corridors while carrying breakfast trays. She smiled at him in passing, the only real smile in his long day. Gradually, they began trading a few words. First about work. Forgotten soap in room 212, a draft in 219. Then about the weather and the city, small things that brightened the endless shifts. He caught himself thinking of her more than he should, looking forward to corridor meetings, remembering how she tucked a loose strand of hair under her cap. But it was foolish, and he knew it. Mary was older and more experienced. Rumors said she had a fiancé, a carpenter from another neighborhood. The young man had nothing but his job, a rented room, and 2 decent suits. He buried these thoughts and focused on what he could control: perfect service and remembering the faces of regular guests. Then came the first real betrayal he would never forget. Among the waiters was Lucas, roughly his age, cheerful and always ready to help. He had worked at the hotel nearly 2 years and seemed reliable. The young man trusted him when Lucas suggested splitting the tips from a large anniversary banquet. 17 guests, 3 waiters. The shared tips came to $25, a fine sum. Lucas took the money, promising to divide it fairly at shift's end. But Lucas left early, claiming a headache. The next day, he handed over $3 with a casual, "Your share." The young man stared at the coins. $3 from 25, split 3 ways, should have been closer to 8. "There was more," he said quietly. Lucas shrugged. "That's all that remained after I paid for a bottle we broke." No bottle had been broken. The young man remembered every detail of the evening, but arguing was pointless. Lucas was older, better connected, and there was no proof. He took the $3 and walked away. He never trusted Lucas again and stopped trusting colleagues until he knew them well. The lesson was bitter but useful. In this world, everyone fought for their place and their piece of bread. Friendship existed, but it demanded time, testing, and proof. Naivety was a luxury he could no longer afford. Mr. Bennett noticed the change. The young man grew more serious, cautious, and attentive to detail. One quiet afternoon, the maître d'hôtel called him over. "You've changed," he said. "That's good. Too much trust kills as surely as too little. Find the balance." "How, sir?" "Observe, listen, verify, and remember, in this house, the walls have ears, and people wear 2 faces, one for the guests, another for their own. Your job is to learn which is real." The young man took the words to heart. He began noticing more: a waiter pocketing sugar from tables, a maid reading letters while cleaning rooms, the doorman accepting small payments from messengers wanting priority. Nothing criminal, just small tricks for survival. He himself never stole, not from lofty principles, but from fear. Fear of losing his place was stronger than any temptation. His position meant stability, respect, and a chance to rise. Risking it for a few dollars seemed madness. He kept learning. He studied wine labels, memorized guests' preferences, and anticipated wishes from a gesture or glance. He learned when to approach and when to leave guests in peace. He learned to read the mood of the room like a sailor reads the sea from invisible signs. At 22, he was promoted to senior waiter. The raise brought $8 a week and far greater responsibility. Now, he oversaw his own section of the dining room, the junior waiters under him, and the flawless service at his tables. Mr. Charles Bennett was growing older. His back had begun to stoop, and his hands trembled slightly when holding heavy trays. Yet his mind remained sharp and his eye keen. He still ruled the dining room, but relied more and more on the young man, entrusting him with difficult guests and delicate situations. One evening after the shift, Mr. Bennett held him back. "You will make a fine maître d'hôtel one day," he said simply, "if you never forget the most important thing." "What is that, sir?" "Remember where you came from. See every guest as a person, not just a wallet. And never forget that behind every apron stands another life, another set of hopes." The young man nodded. The words sank deep, both a heavy burden and a solid support. He truly never forgot his origins, the tenement on the Lower East Side, his mother's gnarled hands, his father dying in poverty. These memories drove him forward. Sometimes at night, he woke from nightmares, carrying laundry through muddy streets and watching the white linens fall into a puddle, or being fired and standing on the avenue in ragged clothes with nowhere to go. He would lie awake, listening to the city sounds, but in the morning, he put on his uniform and became the senior waiter once more. Mr. Bennett retired in the spring of 1893 at the age of 62. The farewell was modest. A glass of champagne in the staff room, kind words from management, and an envelope with a bonus. The old maître d'hôtel shook hands with everyone, held the young man's gaze a moment longer, nodded, and left through the service door, as he had done for 40 years. Only this time, forever. The young man was 25. He was appointed maître d'hôtel of the 3rd floor, the most prestigious level. Wealthy industrialists, bankers, aristocrats, and foreign diplomats stayed there. They expected flawless service and paid generously for it. His salary rose to $15 a week, plus richer tips. Now he could afford a larger room on a better street with a window facing the avenue and its own entrance. He bought a second good suit, leather gloves, and visited the barber weekly. Small things, but for someone who grew up in the tenements, they felt like luxury. His mother died quietly in her sleep that same winter. He buried her beside his father and ordered a simple plaque with their names and dates. Standing by the grave under wet snow, he thought she never saw him in this position. Perhaps it was better that way. She had always feared that climbing too high would make the fall more painful. The 3rd floor of the Grand Palace lived by its own rules. Here, speed mattered less than perfection, haste less than attentiveness. His task was to know everything about every guest without asking questions. He remembered who preferred coffee with milk and who took it black, who read the morning paper and who preferred the evening edition, who needed an extra pillow or a carafe of water at night. These details he stored in a mental notebook that had no pages but never failed him. He developed his own system of observation. Every evening in his room, he mentally reviewed the day, fixing every detail. Who spoke with whom in the lobby? Who received a letter and how they reacted? Who lingered in their room longer than usual? Small things that formed a complete picture, like pieces of a mosaic. It was not spying, it was professional necessity. To serve well, one must understand. To understand, one must see. To see, one must remain invisible. Everything Mr. Bennet had taught him now made perfect sense as he took responsibility for an entire floor. Among the regular guests on the 3rd floor was Mr. Arthur Montfort, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with a neat grey beard, refined manners, and sad eyes. He came once a month and stayed for a week, spending his days in meetings and his evenings alone. Room 218 was always kept in perfect order. Mr. Montfort was generous with tips, polite to the staff, and never made unreasonable demands. One evening, about 6 months after his appointment, the new maître d'hôtel noticed something unusual. Mr. Montfort descended to the lobby, glanced around as if checking whether anyone was watching, and quickly left the hotel. He returned 2 hours later with a veiled lady. They went up to the 3rd floor by the service stairs, avoiding the main hall. The maître d'hôtel saw it, but pretended not to notice. It was not his business. The pattern repeated. Every visit by Mr. Montfort was accompanied by the appearance of the veiled lady. She arrived late, left early, always cautious. One day, the maître d'hôtel accidentally met her in the corridor. She lifted her head, and he saw a young face, no older than 25, beautiful but weary, her eyes full of fear. A week later, Mr. Montfort summoned him to the room. The maître d'hôtel entered, expecting a usual request for wine or some adjustment in service. Instead, Mr. Montfort stood by the window, gazing at the lights of the avenue. "You have seen her?" he said without turning. "Sir, I don't understand." "Don't pretend. You see everything. That is your job." The maître d'hôtel remained silent. Mr. Montfort turned. "She is my daughter from my first marriage. Her mother died when she was 5. I remarried a woman from a powerful family. She insisted I send the girl to a boarding school far from New York. I agreed. Cowardice? Yes. but I chose peace in the family. He fell silent, poured himself brandy, and drank it in one gulp. Now my daughter is 24. She ran away from the school, came to New York, and lives somewhere, earning a living by sewing. My wife must not know. Do you understand? The maître d'hôtel nodded. I meet her here because it is the only safe place. I ask for your silence. Sir, I have seen nothing and heard nothing. That is my job. Mr. Montfort looked at him for a long time, then extended his hand. In the palm lay 5 gold coins, $100, nearly a month's salary. The maître d'hôtel did not take them. Sir, that is not necessary. I keep the secrets of all guests. It is part of the service. Mr. Montfort did not insist, but something changed in his eyes. Gratitude mixed with surprise, as if he had not expected honesty in this world. From then on, Mr. Montfort became something of an ally. Not a friend, the gulf between them was too wide, but a man one could trust within reason. They never spoke of personal matters again, but Mr. Montfort sometimes shared advice, warned of important events, and recommended the hotel to his acquaintances, always praising the impeccable service on the 3rd floor. From this story, the maître d'hôtel learned the main thing. Every person has secrets. Wealth and titles do not free one from pain. Luxurious suites hide lives as complicated as those in the tenements. Only the scenery is different. Mary Callahan still worked as a maid. Her fiancé had never married her. He chose the daughter of the workshop owner instead. Mary accepted it calmly, without tears or complaints. She continued cleaning rooms and changing linens. Now they worked on the same floor, often crossing paths and exchanging information about guests. Room 219 asks for more towels, she would say. Room 221 complains about a draft from the window, he would reply. Short, businesslike phrases, yet they carried warmth. He still felt something for her, no longer youthful infatuation, but a quiet attachment. She was part of his world, reliable and constant, like the smell of wax in the corridors or the creak of floorboards under the carpet. His daily routine settled. Mornings began at 6 with coffee in a small cafe on the corner and a newspaper. A leisurely walk to the hotel. The workday lasted until 10 in the evening, sometimes longer if important guests arrived. He ate with the staff in the kitchen and had late suppers from banquet leftovers. The food was good, nothing like what he had eaten as a child. His day off fell on Monday, when the hotel was relatively quiet. He spent it walking the city, visiting bookstores, or occasionally the theater in the cheap seats. New York changed around him. New buildings rose, subway lines were being dug, automobiles grew more numerous. But inside the Grand Palace, time flowed differently, slower, as if preserved in amber. By the fall of 1899, the young man had turned 32. New York prepared to greet the new century with special excitement. Newspapers wrote of coming wonders, a 20th century of peace without wars, prosperity without poverty, knowledge without limits. The maître d'hôtel read these articles in the morning cafe and smiled to himself. He had seen too much to believe in utopias. The 3rd floor of the Grand Palace ran like Swiss clockwork under his management. Management was pleased. Guests left thankful notes. The staff respected him for his strictness and fairness. Life had settled into a familiar rhythm. Morning, work, evening, sleep. Sometimes he thought he would spend the rest of his days in these corridors, keeping other people's secrets and remaining a mystery even to himself. At the end of November, an unusual party arrived at the hotel. Edward Sinclair, a powerful industrialist from Pittsburgh, had reserved 3 suites, one for himself, one for his wife, and one for his secretary. Sinclair was a man in his early 50s, heavy-set, with hard features and a manner that tolerated no argument. His wife, Eliza, seemed 20 years younger, fragile, pale, with nervous movements. The secretary, Mr. Marcus Hale, stayed in the shadows, appearing only when called, taking notes, nodding, and disappearing. From the first day, the maître d'hôtel sensed tension. Sinclair demanded much: a special breakfast, newspapers from 3 different publications, a courier twice a day, and absolute silence in the corridor after 9 in the evening. His wife rarely left her suite, dined separately, and asked the maids to clean quickly and silently. The secretary darted between rooms, carrying sealed envelopes and receiving visitors downstairs in the lobby, but allowing no one upstairs. The maître d'hôtel fulfilled every request flawlessly, yet a feeling of unease never left him. He had learned to trust his intuition, an inner compass that rarely failed. Something was wrong with this family, something hidden and dangerous. On the 3rd night of their stay, he noticed a strange thing. Early in the morning, around 5 o'clock, when the hotel was silent, someone entered Mr. Sinclair's suite. The maître d'hôtel was on night duty that evening, replacing a sick colleague, and happened to be in the floor storeroom sorting candle supplies. He heard the door creak and quiet footsteps. Peering carefully, he saw a man in a dark overcoat and a hat with the brim pulled low slip into suite 221. The man had his own key. The door opened without effort. The maître d'hôtel noted it mentally but did not interfere. Perhaps a business partner or relative, it was not his concern as long as hotel rules were not broken. But the detail stuck with him. Why meet at 5 in the morning when it could be done during the day? The next night he was on duty again, and again, around 5, the same figure appeared in the corridor. This time, the maître d'hôtel saw more. Medium height, expensive boots, confident movements. The man knew exactly where he was going and did not hesitate. On the morning of December 6th, the hotel erupted with screams. A maid entering to clean Mr. Sinclair's suite ran into the corridor, clutching her throat, unable to speak. The maître d'hôtel was the first to reach the door. Edward Sinclair lay on the floor between the bed and the window. His head was twisted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were open, his face frozen in surprise. An overturned chair lay nearby. The window was wide open, curtains billowing in the cold wind. The maître d'hôtel froze on the threshold. Years of service had taught him calm in any situation, but his heart pounded so loudly he thought the whole corridor could hear it. He stepped back, ordered the maid to fetch the manager, and stood guard at the door, letting no one in. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. Inspector William Hayes, a man of about 40 with a tired face and piercing eyes, examined the body, the room, and questioned the staff. The maître d'hôtel told everything he knew about the guest's arrival and behavior, but did not mention the nighttime visitor. Not yet. Instinct told him to wait. Inspector Hayes quickly ruled it an accident. Mr. Sinclair had probably felt ill during the night, got up, tripped over the chair, and fell badly, breaking his neck. Death was instantaneous. He had opened the window earlier to air the room. Everything seemed logical. But the maître d'hôtel saw the inconsistencies. The chair stood too far from the bed. If a man got up at night, why cross the entire room to the window? There were no signs of struggle on the floor, but the carpet under the body was slightly shifted, as if something heavy had been dragged. And most importantly, the door was locked from the inside, with both the key and the bolt. How could anyone enter and leave a locked room? He remained silent. The police closed the case by evening. The body was taken away. The wife and secretary were questioned formally and released. Eliza Sinclair left the next day, pale and silent in black mourning. Secretary Marcus Hale stayed 2 more days to handle papers, then disappeared too. Hotel management was nervous. A guest's death, even accidental, was a disaster for reputation. The manager gathered the staff and strictly ordered no rumors, normal behavior, and to show guests that the Grand Palace remained under perfect control. The maître d'hôtel nodded and agreed, but inside, everything was boiling. He could not shake the feeling that a murder had occurred and the killer was still nearby, perhaps even in the hotel. The police closed the case by evening, but the maître d'hôtel could not let it go. Something felt wrong. He had spent years learning to notice what others missed, and the scene in Suite 221 refused to leave his mind. The chair stood too far from the bed. The carpet under the body was slightly rumpled. The door had been locked from the inside, and there had been a nighttime visitor. He began his own quiet investigation. First, he spoke with Victor, the night doorman. Victor remembered seeing a man in a dark overcoat leave the hotel around 4:30 that morning. The man had hurried, almost running, with his hat pulled low. Victor had thought he was a guest rushing to catch an early train and had not stopped him. The maître d'hôtel asked for more details: the coat, the boots, the walk. Victor recalled expensive English cloth, polished boots, and a confident stride. The man had known exactly what he was doing. Next, he spoke with Mary Callahan. She cleaned the third floor and noticed things others overlooked. She remembered that for several days before the death, she had found 2 glasses in the wash basin of Sinclair's suite, even though his wife stayed in a separate room. "I thought the secretary came to discuss business," she said, but now she was not sure. The maître d'hôtel pieced the facts together. A nighttime visitor, 2 glasses, a locked door from the inside, and a death ruled an accident. The picture was incomplete, but it was enough to trouble him. He began asking careful questions through guests he trusted and old contacts. He learned that Edward Sinclair had been no ordinary industrialist. He had ruined several companies through clever stock manipulations, leaving hundreds of workers without jobs. Enemies were not in short supply. One piece of information chilled him. 3 years earlier, Sinclair had bankrupted a textile mill. The owner, a man named George Brennan, had taken his own life a month later. Brennan left a widow and 2 sons. One son, Peter, had sworn revenge and then disappeared. The maître d'hôtel felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He checked the room again when no one was watching. The window was on the 3rd floor, but an old tree grew close to the balcony. In theory, someone could climb down. He examined the tree in daylight. On one branch, he found a fresh scratch, as if someone had recently gripped it. A clue? Possibly, but not proof. He also spoke with the young bellboy who had delivered dinner to Sinclair's room the night before the death. The boy remembered hearing 2 male voices inside. One, Sinclair's, rough and irritated, the other quieter, with a slight foreign accent. The accent sounded Swiss or German. The secretary, Marcus Hale, had mentioned Geneva when filling out the registration forms. The pieces were falling into place, but the maître d'hôtel knew he was walking on dangerous ground. If this was murder, the killer was still free. And if the killer realized that the maître d'hôtel of the 3rd floor was no longer just a shadow, but an investigator, then he himself could become the next target. He decided to continue, carefully, slowly, gathering information grain by grain. He had spent his whole life being invisible. Now, for the first time, he felt the need to see clearly and act. Winter covered New York in raw fog that seeped through coats and settled in the lungs. December was gloomy. Short days, long nights, sky the color of dirty lead. The maître d'hôtel continued his duties flawlessly, but every action now had a second, parallel thought. He analyzed people, events, coincidences, searching for the thread that would tie everything together. He returned to the details of that night. The locked door remained the biggest riddle. He studied the lock on Suite 221. Everything worked properly. It could only be locked from inside. Yet somehow the killer had left. He considered the window again. The 3rd floor was high, but the old tree grew close enough. In theory, one could climb out onto the balcony, swing to the tree, and descend. He examined the tree during the day when no one was watching. The bark was old and moss-covered, but on one branch he found a fresh scratch. An ulka? Perhaps, but not proof. Anyone could have made it. He continued careful conversations with the staff. The cook remembered that a few days before the death, Sinclair had ordered dinner for two in his room, unusual since he usually dined alone or with his wife downstairs. Expensive dishes, oysters, pheasant, a bottle of Burgundy for $30. The waiter who delivered it heard two male voices inside. One was Sinclair's, rough and irritated. The second was quieter, with a slight accent. The maître d'hôtel returned to Marcus Hale. Through a contact in the police, he found the cheap hotel in the Lower East Side where the secretary had stayed after leaving the Grand Palace. Why such modest lodgings for the secretary of a rich industrialist? Lack of money or desire to remain unnoticed? On his day off, he took a risk. He went to the small hotel, spoke with the landlady, pretending to be a distant relative looking for Hale on family matters. The talkative woman said Mr. Hale had lived there 3 weeks, paid on time, then left, saying he was returning to Pittsburgh. But he left a small suitcase behind and asked her to keep it. He never returned. The maître d'hôtel paid her $10. In the basement, she showed him the old leather suitcase with initials. Inside were shirts, underwear, a book in German, and papers, ordinary accounts and receipts. But in the last pocket, he felt something hard. He pulled out a single left glove of fine leather with the monogram E.S. Edward Sinclair. His heart beat faster. The glove of the dead man in the secretary's belongings. It could mean everything or nothing. Perhaps Hale had simply picked it up to return. But back in his room, examining the glove under a magnifying glass, he found tiny dark particles in the seams, bits of bark and moss, traces from the tree. The next day, he told Mary everything. She was the only person in the hotel he trusted completely. She listened gravely. "You are playing with fire," she said. "If this is murder, the killer will not hesitate to remove a witness." "I know. Then why continue?" He could not answer at once. "Because if not me, then who?" Mary sighed and nodded. She had seen something too. The day before the death, in Suite 221, she had found a dark blue wool thread caught on the corner of the writing desk. She had removed it without thinking, but she remembered clearly. It matched the livery of the hotel doorman. The maître d'hôtel felt a chill. Victor wore such a uniform, but Victor was his friend. Could it be? He checked the liveries under the pretext of inspection. 3 were intact. On the 4th, young doorman Jack's jacket, a thread was missing from the right sleeve seam, exactly where it could have caught on sharp furniture. He spoke with Jack privately. The young man grew nervous. "Were you on the 3rd floor that night?" "No, sir. I was on duty downstairs in the lobby." "Your livery is torn. Where did you catch it?" "I don't remember, sir. Maybe on a nail in the storeroom?" It was a lie. The maître d'hôtel saw it in the tremor of his hands. He pressed gently. Jack finally broke. "A man approached me the day before Mr. Sinclair died. He gave me $50 to leave the service stairs to the 3rd floor unlocked that night. I thought it was for a secret visit to a mistress. I agreed. $50 is a lot for me." "What did the man look like?" "Tall, hat low, voice with a foreign accent." The pieces were coming together. The secretary, or whoever he really was, had prepared an escape route. He had killed Sinclair, climbed down the tree, returned via the service stairs, and blended with the night guests. But Jack was an unwitting accomplice. The maître d'hôtel decided not to report him to the police. The boy had a sick mother and younger siblings. Instead, he told him to tell the truth if Inspector Hayes called him. The maître d'hôtel went to Inspector William Hayes with what he had. Not full proof, but enough to raise questions. The inspector received him wearily. "The case is closed. Accident. What else do you need?"
I saw strange things, Inspector. The nighttime visitor, the glove in the secretary's luggage, the thread from a doorman's livery, fresh scratches on the tree outside the window. Hayes drummed his fingers on the desk. The visitor could have been a partner, the glove forgotten by chance, the thread from any doorman, scratches from anything. You have no proof of murder, only imagination.
Stick to your job, maître d'hôtel, and leave detective work to us. The maître d'hôtel left the station with clenched teeth. Hayes either would not or could not listen. The case was closed. Management was satisfied. Why create problems? He was alone. Alone against the killer, against the system, against indifference. It was frightening, but he could not stop. Not now. That evening, returning to his room late, he found a note on the table. A simple folded sheet with printed letters. Stop digging, or you will be next. He stood, holding the paper, feeling his blood run cold. Someone knew. Someone was watching. He could have stopped, forgotten, returned to the safety of being a shadow. But something inside rebelled. All his life he had hidden, stayed silent, obeyed. Perhaps the time had come to stop hiding. January brought sudden cold. The river froze at the banks. The air burned the lungs. In the Grand Palace, they stoked the fires hotter than usual. The corridors filled with dry heat that gave headaches by evening. The maître d'hôtel continued working, but now every step was accompanied by a glance over his shoulder. The note lay in his vest pocket, a constant reminder that he was no longer the invisible observer. He was a target. He did not tell anyone, not even Mary. The fewer who knew, the less danger. But fear now lived with him constantly. Not paralyzing, but cold, forcing him to be more careful, to check his door lock twice, to avoid dark alleys, to stay near people. He continued digging, but changed tactics. Instead of direct questions, he gathered information indirectly, through third parties and casual conversations. He learned more about Sinclair's enemies. 3 years earlier, the industrialist had ruined a mill in Pittsburgh through stock tricks. The owner had killed himself. His son, Peter, had sworn revenge and disappeared. The description matched. Tall, thin, light hair, scar on the left cheek, slight accent from time spent in Geneva. The maître d'hôtel felt the puzzle coming together. Marcus Hale was not the real name. It was Peter Brennan, son of the ruined factory owner, who had worked his way into Sinclair's confidence as secretary to wait for the right moment. The trip to New York and the stay at the hotel had given him the perfect opportunity. But clarity was not enough. He needed proof that would convince the police. The glove, the thread, the scratches, all circumstantial. He needed to find Peter or prove that Hale and Brennan were the same man. He asked to see the registration documents Hale had filled out. The address in Geneva was fake, another confirmation. The landlady in the cheap hotel had said Hale planned to return to Pittsburgh. Lie or truth? Perhaps he had gone back to disappear among thousands of people. The maître d'hôtel wrote a letter to the Pittsburgh police describing Peter Brennan's appearance and asking if such a man had been seen recently. The answer came after 10 days. No trace. Dead end. Either Peter had left the country or was hiding, waiting for the case to be forgotten. He understood he needed a different approach. If he could not find the killer directly, he could try to provoke him into making a mistake. He decided on a risky step. Through a journalist acquaintance who wrote society columns for a small paper, he passed information. Nothing concrete, but enough to interest readers. New circumstances have appeared in the death of industrialist Edward Sinclair at the Grand Palace Hotel. Sources say the police may reopen the verdict of accident. The article appeared at the end of January. A small note on the third page that most readers missed, but the maître d'hôtel hoped the one person who needed to see it would notice. A week passed. Nothing. He was almost losing hope when the second warning came. Victor was attacked. On his way home after his shift, 2 masked men beat him badly in a dark alley. They broke a rib, smashed his face, and left without taking money or watch. Victor ended up in the hospital. The maître d'hôtel visited him, bringing fruit and newspapers. Victor lay bandaged, one eye swollen. Did they say anything? One said, "Tell your friend to shut up. Nothing more." The maître d'hôtel felt cold. They had used Victor to warn him. The next blow would come straight at him. But he could not stop. Victor had suffered because of him. This was his responsibility. "Forgive me," he said quietly. Victor tried to smile despite the pain. "You are trying to find the truth. That is worthy." The maître d'hôtel left the hospital with a heavy heart. He had put his friend in danger. Perhaps next would be Mary or someone else. He had to end this before worse happened. Thomas decided the only way forward was to provoke Peter into making a mistake. If the killer was still in New York, watching the hotel and reading the newspapers, he would react to new information. He approached his journalist acquaintance again. This time the article was more specific. New evidence has surfaced in the death of industrialist Edward Sinclair at the Grand Palace Hotel. An anonymous witness claims to have seen a suspicious man leaving the victim's room on the night of the death. Police intend to conduct a confrontation soon. The piece appeared in early February. Thomas increased vigilance, asking doormen and bellboys to watch for suspicious visitors. He himself spent nearly every hour in the hotel, sleeping only 4 hours a night, the rest of the time observing and waiting. A week passed with nothing. He was almost ready to abandon the plan when Mary brought strange news. While cleaning room 221, she noticed someone had been there recently. The door had been left unlocked, though the suite had stood empty for 2 months. Fresh fingerprints marked the windowsill. The balcony door was slightly ajar, despite the winter cold. Thomas went upstairs at once. The prints were fresh, no more than a day old. Someone had entered through the balcony, exactly as before. A new break showed on the tree branch outside. Peter had returned. The article had frightened him into coming back to destroy any remaining evidence. Thomas knew he needed a proper trap. He asked Mary to leave something in the room that looked like important evidence. A small notebook he had written himself, imitating a witness statement. Saw a tall man with a scar on his left cheek leaving via the balcony. They placed the notebook prominently on the writing desk. Then he convinced Inspector Hayes to post 2 policemen in the neighboring room, watching through a slightly open door. Hayes agreed reluctantly. "If this doesn't work, I close the case for good, and I ask you to stop interfering." Thomas nodded. This was his last chance. They waited 3 nights. The policemen took turns, bored and grumbling. Thomas stayed in the floor storeroom, listening to every sound. On the 4th night, around 3 in the morning, he heard a quiet creak. The sound came from the balcony. Thomas froze, holding his breath. Another creak, then soft footsteps inside room 221. He slowly stood and opened the storeroom door a crack. The corridor was lit by one dim lamp. The door to 221 stood ajar. He signaled the policeman. They slipped out silently and approached. Thomas pushed the door wider. A man stood with his back to them, holding the notebook. Tall, thin, wearing a dark coat. Exactly the person he had been looking for. "Peter Brennan," Thomas said quietly. The man spun around. In the faint moonlight, Thomas saw his face. Young, haggard, with a scar on the left cheek. His eyes were full of rage and fear at the same time. Peter lunged toward the balcony, but the policemen were faster. They grabbed him and twisted his arms. He stopped resisting quickly and lowered his head. "I knew it was a trap," he said quietly, "but I couldn't leave the notebook. I thought it was a real witness." Inspector Hayes arrived half an hour later and formally arrested him. At the station, the young man confessed almost immediately. He told everything.
how he had taken the job as secretary under a false name, waited for months studying Sinclair's habits, learned of the New York trip, and saw his chance. How he bribed the young doorman, entered via the service stairs at night, confronted Sinclair under the pretext of urgent papers, pushed him when he stood by the window, staged the fall, and escaped down the tree. Then he returned through the service stairs, blended with the night guests, and left through the main entrance.
Victor had seen him, but had not recognized him because he looked like an ordinary guest.
"He ruined my father," Peter said, staring at the floor. "My father hanged himself. My mother was left with nothing. I swore revenge. It was the only justice I could get." Hayes recorded everything and nodded. Thomas stood in the corner listening. He felt no triumph, only deep fatigue and a strange sympathy for this young man who had destroyed his own life for revenge. "Justice and revenge are different things," he said quietly. Peter looked at him for a long time. "For you, they might be. For me, they were the same." The trial took place in April. Peter Brennan was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mitigating circumstances, revenge for his father's death, were taken into account, but the crime was too serious for full acquittal. Thomas attended and gave testimony. When the sentence was read, Peter did not flinch. He accepted it with a stone face. Afterward, Inspector Hayes approached him.
"You were right," he said simply. "Sorry I didn't believe you at once.
You did your job, I did mine. You're not just a maître d'hôtel, you're a detective." Thomas smiled. "I am a shadow inspector, a man no one notices. That is my strength." Hayes nodded, shook his hand, and left. In the hotel, everything returned to its usual rhythm. Management was worried about the publicity, but the scandal turned out less damaging than feared. Newspapers wrote about the solved crime, mentioned the vigilance of the hotel staff, and then moved on to other news. The third floor resumed welcoming guests. Suite 221 was now occupied by a Belgian diplomat who knew nothing of its past. Victor recovered and returned to work. Young Jack, the doorman, stayed on at the hotel. Inspector Hayes decided not to charge him, considering the punishment disproportionate to his small role. Mary continued cleaning rooms, smiling at Thomas in the corridors with the same warm smiles.
Arthur Montfort, learning of Thomas's role in solving the murder, congratulated him the next time they met. "You are a man of honor," he said. "There are few like you these days." Thomas bowed silently. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had done what he had to do. Nothing more, nothing less. But something inside him had changed. He realized he could be more than just a shadow. His powers of observation, patience, and attention to detail were not merely professional skills, but something greater, tools for seeking truth in a world full of lies. At night, returning to his room, he sometimes remembered Peter's words about justice and revenge. He wondered if he had done the right thing by sending the young man to prison. Murder was murder. The law was the law. But had Sinclair not deserved his fate? Did the system that allowed the rich to ruin the poor with impunity deserve to be called just? These questions had no simple answers. Perhaps they had no answers at all. Thomas knew one thing. He would continue seeking truth in his small world, on his third floor, among these corridors and suites, because, if not him, then who? Spring of 1900 arrived with unexpected warmth. Chestnut trees on the avenues bloomed early, the air filled with a scent of fresh leaves and bakery bread. New York prepared to meet the new century with optimism that seemed almost tangible in street conversations, newspaper headlines, and the faces of passers-by. Thomas watched this excitement from the hotel windows, thinking how quickly people forget the past and rush toward the future. He turned 39 in May, an age when many take stock of their lives, look back at the path traveled, and ask about the meaning of what they have lived. He looked back too, but without regret. His life had not been bright or full of adventures like those in novels, but it was his own, built step by step with his own hands from nothing. The third floor of the Grand Palace remained his kingdom. Here he was still the maître d'hôtel, the man who created order from chaos and turned service into art. Management valued him more than before. After the murder case, the hotel's reputation had not suffered. On the contrary, a certain aura of mystery had appeared that attracted curious guests. His salary was raised to $20 a week, allowing him to save more and live a little more comfortably. He moved to a more spacious apartment on a street overlooking a park with 2 rooms and windows facing green trees. In the mornings, he could see gardeners trimming bushes, children running along paths, elderly couples strolling under umbrellas. These simple pictures brought him more joy than any luxury, perhaps because he remembered times when his window looked into a dark air shaft and the only entertainment was the noise of drunken neighbors. Victor became his true friend. Not just a colleague with whom one exchanged a few words, but a man with whom one could sit in silence, and that silence would be understood. They sometimes spent days off together, going to cafes, playing cards, discussing politics and the city. Victor married a widow with 3 children. Thomas became godfather to the youngest, a serious-eyed boy who dreamed of becoming a train engineer. Mary had changed too. She had aged, of course, as everyone does, wrinkles around the eyes, grey in her hair that she did not hide, but a quiet wisdom had appeared in her that drew him. They talked more than before, sometimes during breaks between shifts, sometimes after work when the corridors emptied, speaking of life, of people, of all they had seen over the years. "You have changed since that story," she said once. "In what way?" "You have become more confident, as if you understood you can be more than a shadow." He thought about her words. Perhaps she was right. Solving the murder had changed something in him. It had not made him a hero. He did not believe in heroism, but it had shown that even the most unnoticeable person is capable of an act that matters. After the trial, Thomas found himself talking with Mary Callahan more often. Their exchanges in the corridors were no longer only about work, forgotten soap or drafts in rooms. During short breaks or after late shifts, when the hotel grew quiet, they would sit in the staff room or take a short walk in the nearby park on his day off. Mary asked about the case. He told her some details, choosing his words carefully. She listened without judgment. "You did what you thought was right," she said simply. "That's all any of us can do." He began to notice small things about her, the way she tucked a strand of hair under her cap, the quiet strength in her hands after years of hard work. The old, unacknowledged feelings from his younger days had slowly turned into something steadier and deeper. He caught himself looking forward to her smile at the end of a long day. One evening, after a particularly tiring shift, he asked if she would like to walk with him on his next day off. Mary agreed with a quiet nod and a small, genuine smile. They walked along the avenue, watching carriages and the first automobiles pass by. They spoke of the changing city, of the guests they served who hid such complicated lives behind fine clothes and polite manners. Thomas shared more about his childhood than he had ever told anyone. The tenement, his mother's laundry, the hunger to become someone. Mary told him about her own early years, losing her family young and working since she was a girl. For the first time, Thomas allowed himself to imagine a life beyond the hotel corridors. Nothing grand, just a small, steady place and someone to come home to. The thought both frightened and excited him. He had built his entire world around being invisible and self-sufficient. Opening it to another person felt like stepping off a safe, well-worn path. Yet with Mary, it felt possible. He continued teaching the younger staff, passing on what Mr. Bennett had taught him years earlier. To the new busboys and waiters, he said, "You are not servants, you are masters of your craft. Without people like us,